God dwells in you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out this early Sunday morning for our Black History Forum. Black History is the Future is our theme. My name is Monique Thomas. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am a former warden here at All Saints, longtime member, and I'm so pleased today to be having this discussion. Black History Month usually, in my experience, is very limiting. And I'm just going to jump on my soapbox really quickly for my introduction. The things that are happening in Florida, which I think it's not going to be limited there, but in censoring Black history because it makes people feel uncomfortable. And this is why these kind of conversations are important, because if we don't know our history, we can't learn from it. The other thing is that there is often this idea around Black history that it's all about the suffering and the struggle. And when I was in school, I can zero it down to slavery, Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King Jr., yada, 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 Barack Obama, right? And it's like there's so much more to Black history than that. And there's so much more than struggle. The struggle is beautiful and it's wonderful and it's something that we need to learn about. But we are people that are of joy. We are about love. We are about aspirations and achievements. And we are hopeful people. We're about hope. I am proud to be Black. I'm proud of my race, my people, my culture, myself. And so when we were having a conversation about this forum, I said, you know, I want to do something that gets us out of the struggle. I want to talk about something that talks in terms of Blackness and Black people in the way that my friend Dr. Brunel Anderson says, beloved Blackness. And the thing that came to me was Afrofuturism. I said, how about we do something like that? Maybe because I had just seen Wakanda Forever. I don't know, but it was on my mind, right? And I said, let's do something like that. And that's when Chase said, yes, Black history is the future. And so we got on the call and we found these two incredible speakers that I'm so happy to be here with today for our forum. So with that, without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce them. And they have some impressive bios, y'all. So next to me is Yemi Kuku. Yemi is a photographer and filmmaker based in Los Angeles. For the last 6 years, he has served as the photo editor and film manager on staff at Fellowship Monrovia. His photographic work most often explores double consciousness in people of the African diaspora, racial exposure in contemporary American mythology, pop culture, and the intersection of faith and justice. It's amazing. Currently, Yemi is working on his first photography collection and directing a documentary film about racial trauma and access to mental health services in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Next, we have Tim Cogshell. Tim is a veteran film critic and journalist with over 30 years of experience working for national print, broadcast, and internet-based media concerns, including NPR, KNBC, Spectrum News, Fox News LA, ABC7, Box Office Magazine, the LA Times, and Alt Film Guide, among others. He has produced feature film. He's a produced feature film screenwriter and producer of narrative films and documentaries. His projects have won film festival awards and are widely distributed theatrically, streaming, and on broadcast television, including PBS networks, cable, satellite networks, both nationally and internationally. Tim Cogshell Productions has produced short films, public service announcements, and branded content for government agencies and national companies, including the City of Los Angeles, Major League Baseball, among others. They are a full-service company providing concept development, writing, production, post-production for all manners of products and services. So
I don't know that. You found the long resume. I've got a short bio. It's like 3 sentences, I promise you. Oh, my.
And I tried to cut that down. That's the edited version. No.
Yeah.
So thank you. So these two gentlemen today are well equipped to have this conversation. I'm just so excited that you're here. I want to start first with the question of, because our topic is Afrofuturism, how would you define Afrofuturism? And I'll go to Yemi and then to Tim.
Sure. I define Afrofuturism as like an artistic, but also social political framework where we're looking and interrogating the past and present in order to imagine futures for Black people, right? And so for me, that fits into, art, music, film, but also to social movements and economic justice and policy making. So it kind of, there's some quibbles about how to define that from a film standpoint, but I love that definition because it fits into my life. So yeah.
Well, I like the big definition for things. The broadest possible definition that we can couch these things in. There's a very specific way that Mark Derry defined the term back in 1994 in this essay that he wrote. And it's a lovely definition, but I do think that we have to do this thing for ourselves, right? We have to think about it ourselves. What does it mean, this thing called Afrofuturism? So for me, it's about black folks, black and brown folks, imagining ourselves in the future, seeing ourselves in the future, whatever the future is, future tomorrow, future 500 years from now, future 3,000 years from now. Contextually, that imagining has to involve all of the things that have happened to us, including the things that have happened to us in the past. They inform us now, and they will inform our future, but they do not define our future. So Afrofuturism, for me, reflects a moment when we as black folks get to imagine ourselves in the future, and in this future, because it's ours, we win. All the time.
Thank you both for those definitions. And as you were talking, Tim, I was thinking about Whoopi Goldberg, the actress, who has done, she did one of the spinoffs of Star Trek. And she talked about why she loved science fiction, but she didn't see black people there. And it made her question, do we have a future? Are we in the future? And then Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura in the very first Star Trek series back in the 60s, she saw her. And she was like, oh, there's a future for us. And so that idea of sort of Afrofuturism, it seems like something that's sort of steeped in fiction and television and film, but it really has ramifications for how we see ourselves, right? If we don't see ourselves represented, that larger conversation about, well, then do we see ourselves at all, and do we see ourselves having a future?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think like that question and that point is powerful because that's my story, right? Like, I think for me, just being in a filmmaking and creative space wasn't on the table professionally for me growing up. It was a question of survival. So practical concerns like being a lawyer, being a doctor, being an engineer. My parents are Nigerian, so those are the three options available to you. Right? And so that was my whole experience growing up. That's all I could do. And it wasn't until I was exposed to the stories of Octavia Butler and other kind of Afrofuturism concepts that I actually entertained the idea of exploring what my possible future could be as a creator, as an artist. And so that's very much, I love that you said that because that's just my story personally. So yeah, sorry to tangent there.
No, that's wonderful. And my parents are African American, but I had those three options too. And engineer was at the top. They were like, what are you gonna do with that communications degree? Are you moving home after? No, you need to get a job. So that is real. Can you tell me, you've both talked about the work that you've done, and we read your bios. Can you talk a little bit about how you got drawn into the work that you do, why it's important and how you got drawn into it?
Well, let me go way back, because I'm a wee bit older than, by about 30 years or so. So when I was a little kid in the late 60s, there was a show that even preceded Nichelle Nichols on Star Trek. There's a show called Land of the Giants. And completely and totally arbitrarily, it seemed to me, on this show was a black man. I'd never seen a black man on a show like this. The show was set in the future. He was a captain of a spaceship. I'm like, what? The brother's flying the spaceship? You know, and he was good looking, and he wore a uniform, and he was in charge, and he had authority, but he was really just working, just being who he was in this future. And I think that was my first moment of thinking to myself, lo and behold, and I haven't connected all of these things together. I joined the Air Force when I was 17. And I swear to you, something about that brother flying that spaceship in 1968 when I was 7 led to me joining the Air Force when I was 17. So that little piece of fiction, narrative, please, I think there are only like 15 episodes of Land of the Giants. It was not a hit show. But that little moment fiction changed my life completely. Joining the Air Force changed my life completely. Sent me on an entirely different direction. Went to all kinds of colleges, did all kinds of things because I was in the Air Force, because of the people that I met when I was in service. So that little piece of fiction did it for me. I didn't know that that was a moment of Afrofuturism, that the term hadn't been invented yet. I didn't even know how it was affecting me at the time. But as we sit here now and we look back at these things, I can see them over and over and over again through my life.
Was what drew you in? Yeah. I think I came pretty late to the party personally. Like I think by the time I really identified, hey, I know that person. By the time I kind of really embraced the idea of like Afrofuturism and black sci-fi kind of in the context of, speculative fiction, I was already in college, right? I wasn't like a child or anything like that. And I remember watching this movie, it's called The Invasion, starring Daniel Craig and Nicole Kidman. Came out in the 2000s, and
it kills me that that's an old movie to him. It hurt just a little.
I wasn't saying that.
That's okay. Hurt just a little. Right, I'm sorry. Go on.
Right. Everything's relative. Time is relative. Time is not. It's a flat circle. It's not. It's right. It's not linear. Right. That's right. We're there and here at the same time. You understand? You feeling me? No. So. Anyway, this movie is one of the like many kind of spin-offs of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers films with the pod people. Anyway, in this movie, basically the aliens are, organisms that can infect the human body and then duplicate that body exactly, and then they discard the body, and then the alien is now you, and except your personality's gone. You're just kind of like a plain kind of, pod person. Anyway, Nicole Kidman's running around the city trying to escape the situation and survive, and she gets onto a subway, and she's like freaking out because the people on the subway clearly are all infected, are all members of this this new alien race, and there's a black couple, and they're like just chilling, and then they like break character and they go, "You need to calm down," and so they're actually pretending, they're performing, right, infection in order to survive the situation. And for some reason, that just kind of like hit me weirdly, because it occurred to me that like, black people would do really well in this situation, right? For a number of reasons. One of them being this kind of like performance that we often have to do in white spaces, right? And so that is kind of a light bulb went off for me, like, oh, actually, like, we're in the future. We be surviving these situations. And so I started to imagine, what would it look like for these people, at the end of the story if it wasn't directed by a white filmmaker who was interested in Nicole Kidman being the hero of the story, right? And so that kind of became, for me, a stirring. And again, as I said, I started to seek out Afrocentric and black-centered characters in science fiction and speculative fiction, and then I kind of fell in love with like alternate history as a specific kind of genre inside of that. And so, that's kind of, I thought I would say is my introduction to Afrofuturism as a concept, so.
Awesome. So I'm gonna go a little off script. We had some preset questions, but we've kind of covered a lot that we were, going to talk about. So I'm gonna go to two places. One, I'm gonna start with double consciousness, because that was in your bio, and it's something that, we in the diaspora talk a lot about. Can you break that down for us? Because that, that example that you gave of the folks in the subway, very much to me reminded me of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably people more qualified to give a proper definition of, W.E. Du Bois's double consciousness concept. But for me, it's always represented the two minds that black people have had to have, in America when operating in the world. There's the version of themselves that they see, and then there's a version of themselves that they have to sort of perform, right? And so for me, one of my interests as a photographer and in my photography practice is kind of unpacking and interrogating what that looks like for not just Black Americans, but people of the African diaspora all over the world. And so a lot of my photography is kind of conceptual ideas. They involve like real interviews with real people, but sometimes I try to embrace the surreal, magical surrealism, that kind of aesthetic, right? Carrie Mae Weems is a huge influence on me. Dawoud Bey is a huge influence on me. And so their work kind of makes me head in that direction creatively. And so I try to kind of unearth some of this visually, right? The idea of what it means to be, of two minds at once. I am born in America, raised in, mostly white schools, but my parents are Nigerian, Yoruba. And so what does that mean to be like raised in a Yoruba home, in a Black home, and then also exist in the world as a Black man, right? And, there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance sometimes that kind of impacted me. And I think as I started to explore what it looked like to have internalized racism, I started to unpack a little bit more about, oh yeah, these patterns are not foreign. These things are talked about. W.B. Du Bois talks about them. So, yeah, that's sort of my definition of, double consciousness, but that's how it kind of impacts the work that I do in my filmmaking and photography. So, yeah.
Thank you. Tim, any thoughts on double consciousness?
Yeah, and thank you for letting me joke about how old I am. But sometimes these things do play out in very particular ways, depending on when you came onto the planet. So I'll be 62 this year. So really applaud. Thank you. Yay, 60s. But it means that I came into the world at a particular time for Black Americans, right? So I was literally born before the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Actually not an enfranchised human being when I got here. And grew up during that very interesting period, right? A mind is a terrible thing to waste, NAACP. So we got messages as young Black folk growing up then that we had to achieve and be and seem like the majority of the society. We had to be like them, talk like them, dress like them, do like them, achieve like them, frankly, be a little bit better than them.
The respectability politics.
This was the dynamic of the time. So when I get to be about 29 years old, I'm here in Los Angeles, and one of the interviews I'm doing is with Tupac Shakur, who happened to be 19 years old. So I was literally 10 years older than Tupac. It was for the movie Juice. And I go over to this fancy hotel, and
This is also a flex, by the way. Yeah, it's Tim is flexing here, and I love it. So
you earn things in those 60 years. You get to do a little something in those 60 years. So so Pac. I'm going to interview Tupac for this movie, and I was a little sick that day. I had a cold. I was coughing. And Tupac Shakur ran over to me, brother, you all right? Opened up a bottle of water, gave me some water. You okay? Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Good looking out, bro. And then he proceeded to go on a cursing rampage using the N-word like you would not believe. And I'm like, I think I see the difference between me and Tupac. Here's the thing about Pac, this extremely erudite. We had a wonderful conversation. Talked about all kinds of things. But Tupac did not care at all what any white people anywhere thought about him. He didn't care what they thought about how he dressed, about how he talked, he didn't care anything about white people, about what they thought about him. He was living Tupac's life exactly the way he wanted to. Tupac knew everything that I knew and a good deal more. But he wasn't living that life that I had been taught to live all those years. But that, I think, represents that double consciousness. But there came a point in society when I think some of us decided to shed that. And you know what? I'm going to be Black all day, every day, whatever that means.
And not just in February. It's interesting that you say that because part of my work, I'm also an artist. I do some theater. I couldn't major in it because, again, that family, that was not an acceptable major. But as an adult, now that I'm, moving towards 50, I'm almost 50, I am now like, I'm gonna claim what I wanna do. And part of what I have been doing is, I grew up under that respectability politics. So I grew up in the 80s when the Cosby Show was a big deal. And my mother would literally make sure that I had my homework done and my dinner was done so she could sit me in front of the TV to watch the Cosby Show. Because this is the kind of family this is the aspiration that you need to be moving towards. He was a doctor, she was a lawyer, the Huxtables. This is what we wanna be. This is how you speak, this is how you dress, this is how you straighten your hair. This is, there was a sense of who I needed to be in my performance in a respectable Black woman in a predominant white culture. And I remember going for a job interview, this was maybe, the early 2000s, and I wore a wig to my interview because I thought, well, I can't wear this to this interview. And this is funny but sad, but interesting. They thought that I was a cancer survivor for the first 6 months because they knew it was a wig. And they were like, oh, this poor sister must be suffering or something, And when I thought about that, it just, oh my gosh, it broke my heart. And I remember sort of my unveiling when I wore my natural hair to work, and everyone said, oh, that's beautiful, why didn't you do that before? So I haven't had a chemical or a heat or anything in my hair for almost 20 years now because I wanted to reclaim that and say that, yes, I can, I am educated, I am respectable, and I'm going to express myself as a Black woman in my way and not let anyone define for me what that means.
Yes.
So, thank you. But that's a really difficult thing because we are constantly dealing with, and I think a lot of it, and again, I'm gonna go back to Florida, is how do we make white people not feel bad? How do we not make white people uncomfortable? How do I make myself small so that I'm not making someone else uncomfortable, right? And so that is, that's what I love about Afrofuturism, because it is bold. It is just, claiming all the greatness that is about Blackness. And with that, there's another question that I want to ask you, because this is the one I mentioned at the beginning. I just saw Wakanda Forever last month. It's now on Disney+. I will be watching it tonight when I get home again and crying again. But when Black Panther came out in 2018, I was working at Caltech. I was working with a group of Black students, Black and Latinx students, and we had set up a screening to go see it. And we went as a Black community, faculty, staff, students, everyone was invited to go. And I just remembered the excitement, and I didn't know why I was so excited. I didn't know what this movie would be. I love Marvel, so I was gonna go anyway. But I just remembered the joy that I felt that this movie was coming out, and then what it did around the world and the conversations that it started. And so that, for me, is such a cool example of Afrofuturism and the power that it can have in the zeitgeist. But I wanted to kind of get your take on that. Why do you think it struck such a chord with so many people?
Well, I'm gonna go first because he's a film critic, and I don't want to follow that.
Oh, right.
Just strategically, just need to. Black Panther is a fascinating thing, right? I think about, and I love the question, I love the setup too, because I think you capture the excitement that we all kind of felt around the release of the film, but also the anxiety, right? This movie's gotta be good, y'all. Like, this movie's gotta be, right? And I know with the release of every major kind of Black cinematic event, there's that sense that, oh man, if we don't get this right, we're not gonna be able to get a chance to do it again, so you guys gotta do it. And so I think speaking to that idea of respectability politics, kind of always navigating the gaze, right? And so for me, Black Panther symbolized an opportunity to imagine what it would look like for a society to exist outside of colonial power, right? What heights could it reach with the resources in place there? And I think that one of the things that I really found kind of exciting about entertaining that thought is I started to look at, like, are there places on Earth right now that were not touched by colonial, influence and power? And I got a chance to visit some of those places, right? There's a community called the Gamvi in Benin. It's a water community, and slavers could not go into the water because their ships were too big for to get into this community. This community's several centuries old, and for the most part wasn't touched by, colonial rule. So I think for me, the exciting part about Black Panther was being able to try to interrogate and find out, where does this actually exist in the world that I live in, And then for me as a documentary photographer, is there a way that I can engage that and like show people these places, right? One of the things that I love about this Afrofuturism conversation is the idea of making the invisible visible, right? And the idea of trying to show people something that they haven't seen before. And I think that the Black Panther films did that. So there you go. Yeah.
Everything he said, literally every single word he said, absolutely, totally, and completely. With particularly the original Black Panther, that pressure, right? And as a Black film critic, there's this certain thing that goes on when Black folks make a movie. It's like, I'm not going to be the brother that, stabs that movie out. I ain't going to be the Black, no. So, bruh, please make a good movie. I'm trying to help here. But I got to keep it real. So this movie comes, this is not only a good movie in terms of its entertainment value, it's an extraordinary movie in terms of what it's thinking about. And particularly in terms of who it's talking to, because the one thing that Black Panther movie, particularly the first one, isn't doing is talking to white folks. That movie ain't talking to white people at all. I think there's only one white dude in that movie, the little dude. I think you got the one bad guy and the other guy. And that movie was Black folks talking to Black folks, having that hard conversation. What I loved about Black Panther is when we looked over there at Killmonger, we were like, that brother's making a lot of sense. And we had to do that, right? Now, look, Killmonger, we're gonna have to figure out a way to do this without you killing everybody, but you're not crazy. You're not crazy. And that was the thing that I think that Black folks in particular deeply appreciated. And I'll tell you this too, I'm a film critic. I have a lot of film critic friends who are not Black. And one of the conversations I had with them about that film is how that film didn't seem to not only not be about white people, it wasn't angry at white people. It didn't even, there's a villain in the movie, but he's not even the villain. Nobody care about him. He's just running around that movie. That movie, you people just don't matter. We got something we're talking about over here. Just be quiet. And then we had this conversation. And I think a lot of white folks were like, you mean we're not the bad guys in this story? Not really? No, not really. And that, I think, mattered too, even in the new Black Panther, the sort of notion that colonialism and all of the havoc that it has caused over these many hundreds of years is real. The things that we are doing about it today are decisions that we have to make. What are you going to do? What am I going to do? We can't keep talking about these people forever. So that, I think, was an interesting thing that Black Panther did. It set off that conversation with conversation we can have with each other.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm really curious because I'd love to hear your analysis of Wakanda Forever, this last one that came out.
Which I deeply appreciate because, again, frankly, this is a conversation that's happening, relatively speaking, between brown folks and Black folks, where we're saying, look, we have a lot of the same issues and problems. There's some white folks over there. They're coming for your stuff. We probably want to be in this together. That's the central conversation. And perhaps if we are in this together, we can talk those people out of their foolishness. They want to colonize us again. And it's a hard conversation between those brown folks and those Black folks, but it's one that needs to be had. We have to decide whether or not we're going to all work together in order for us all to survive. So I think that's a very interesting conversation, too. Plus, it's extremely entertaining. Yeah, sure. They all have to be entertaining, folks. Yeah. If they're not entertaining, it doesn't make any difference what the story is, what the message is. They have to be entertaining. And then you can slip the rest of it in there.
Yeah, I think that says a lot about, for me, one of the most exciting things about that particular conversation, the creative folks who put it together was, there's this kind of, I think what Ryan Coogler's doing as a filmmaker is really fascinating to me in his art, right? I think when I look at the trajectory of his career and the idea that, you know, his first film was Fruitvale Station, Oscar Grant, right? And then he does a spin on Rocky, right, to center Blackness. And then his next endeavor is Wakanda. And I think that Ryan Coogler is an example of an Afrofuturist filmmaker, right? He centers Blackness and he imagines something and he makes visible what is invisible. And so that's really exciting to me, and I'm excited to see where his career goes. But yeah, I love what you said about this idea of, like, you know, having a conversation that needs to be had that's hard. I think one of the things that I really truly love about us, quite frankly, is our willingness to have some of those really hard conversations when it's, quite frankly, inconvenient. Why can't we just, you know, celebrate? Just, you know, that's it. That's all there is to it. But I think the idea that you can present this beautiful, futuristic, utopian society and then have conversations about slavery and who got left behind and who did the slaving and who participated in, you know, I think one of the implications about Wakanda that I feel like not a lot of people talk about is this idea that they were around while a lot of bad things were happening and they made the decisions they made. And the idea that Ryan Coogler as a creative wasn't willing to shy away from that detail and have, you know, Eric Killmonger's character kind of speak to that when he enters the throne room. It's just, there's a level of craftsmanship that I think really needs to be lauded when it comes to these stories of Afrofuturism and yeah, centering Black stories. So anyway, yeah, I love that.
Very
Yeah.
good thing. Beautiful. There's a way, particularly in terms of Ryan Coogler, right, who I met many years ago when he was still going to community college up there, and he was already thinking. He was already thinking in that way. He was trained that way from the ground up. His mom trained him that way. His education trained him that way, studying Black history. So a lot of it has to do with the way you're built. The way you're built is going to define what you think and how you're thinking. And so when we talk about education today, I'm an educator. I spend a lot of time educating Black and brown folks and women, most of my students are women, about the achievements of them. As a matter of fact, all of my students are women, Black and brown women. And pretty much every one of my classes centers a Black or a brown woman. Because why wouldn't it? I want you to know everything that, this week, Zora Neale Hurston. There's a wonderful documentary about Zora Neale Hurston playing on PBS, by the way. You should check it out. It's very good. Zora Neale Hurston, as a journalist, working in the 20s and 30s and 40s.
Ethnographer, anthropologist, like
everything.
Just, oh my God. Yeah.
But you know, if you blink in our education system, you'll miss Zora, unless somebody specifically tells you there was a person called Zora Neale Hurston. She did stuff. She looked like you. And so this is the thing that has to happen. It's what happened with Ryan, and we have to keep doing that all the time, over and over again.
Thank you. Wow, that's so much. I'm just so soaking in all this richness, and I love the flex of Ryan Coogler too. That was cool.
I'm going to be doing that all afternoon. I can't help it.
I love that, and sort of centering Blackness. And one of the things, just a quiet little plug, so I am the DEI manager at the Huntington Library, just down the street. And one of the pieces that we have, a famous piece, is called Blue Boy. It's our most famous piece, and it's a young white man standing with his hat, and he's sort of, people have seen it. So there's an artist, Kehinde Wiley, who painted the Obama portraits. And he's an artist, and he had said, I don't see myself represented in art. So he created a piece called Portrait of a Young Gentleman. It's at the Huntington right now, and it is a conversation with Blue Boy. It's the exact same pose, very similar, very much inspired by it, but it's a young, brown-skinned, dark black-skinned man with locks, wearing Vans, and an Apple Watch, with the exact same pose. And to me, that was a beauty and sort of, I don't know if it's Afrofuturistic, it feels somewhat like that to me, but it just was beautiful. And as you walk into the Huntington and the main gallery, the Blue Boy is on one wall, and Portrait of a Young Gentleman is on the other. And so you're able to look at those really in conversation with each other. But I just thought it was beautiful that where he said, I don't see myself, I'm going to create the art that I want to see. It can be inspired and living. It's not ignoring the art and the work that's come before, but I need to see myself. I need to express that in myself, and I just think it's beautiful. And on that piece, we talked about Black Panther, Zora Neale Hurston, which I got to catch that documentary. What other, if you could name 3 other Afrofuturistic pieces, either art, photography, film, what are your recommendations for people just kind of getting into this genre?
Wow. I think for people just getting in, I'd love to hear your recommendations because you have, you have the arc of history.
That's another little shot of me being so old. I know that was. I know it was. I can feel it.
That wasn't. It wasn't. It was just. But I think 3 recommendations that I would probably have. Right now, I'm listening to a lot of Flying Lotus. He's an artist, instrumentalist, producer. Yeah, I love his music, and when you hear it, you'll hear the aesthetic that's there. Right now, I'm listening to the Yasuke soundtrack, which is anime about Ghanaian samurai in feudal Japan, futuristic feudal Japan. So it's really a fascinating story, and also the music is just incredible. And then I'd say Watchmen on HBO came out in 2019, which I think the timing is really interesting if you're watching that in the context of the last 3-4 years that we've experienced collectively. And it's kind of an interesting take on policing, and it was one of the stories or one of the pop culture experiences that kind of brought a conversation around the Tulsa race massacre back into kind of a national dialogue. And so it's really, if you haven't seen it, it's something that I really recommend. And then I would say the work of Dawood Bey. He's a photographer, and he has a collection and a book called Night Coming Tenderly Black. And he kind of essentially, reimagines what it would look like for people escaping slavery in the antebellum South. And so he travels this imaginary road of Harriet Tubman's pathways, and he takes portraits from the perspective of what an enslaved person chasing freedom would see in some of these like safe houses. So it's really an incredible collection. And has influenced me a lot. So those would be my recommendations.
Those are beautiful, fantastic, man. Flying Lotus in particular. That's very influenced, of course, by Parliament Funkadelic, also Earth, Wind and Fire, a little bit of Sun Ra in there. So yeah, that's sick. That's crazy. I love all of that. On the literature side, there's a wonderful 1937 novel called Black No More by George Schuyler. A short-run adaptation of it as a play ran not too terribly long. But the novel, the 1937 novel, and George Schuyler, black man, born in 1895, I think, in Connecticut, right? Which is pertinent to his upbringing. George was conservative, and George had this very particular perspective about black people, African Americans, in relationship to white Americans in the United States of America. In short, it's basically this. George Schuyler believed that black people were absolutely extraordinary. He believed that black culture was the preeminent culture, not only in America, this is him at the time, but of the entire world. George wrote about how even then, white people listened to black music, jazz, when they really wanted to have a good time. White people dressed like black people. White people danced like black people. He pointed all of this out almost 100 years ago. But he was talking to black people. He was saying, black folk, we're winning. I know it doesn't look like we're winning because there's some stuff going on, and he recognized all of that. But if we were to embrace our winning, if we were to look at ourselves and say, hey, there's nothing wrong with anything over here, and you people must know it because you borrow everything we do. We built the White House. I didn't know we built the White House until I was like 30. That's insane. How is that possible? That nobody told me that black folks built the White House. I've been to the White House. Nobody says it. So that's what he was doing. He wrote this extraordinary book. It was an Afrofuturist book called Black No More. In the book, there was a scientific discovery that allowed black folks to go through this process and be rendered white, imperceptibly white. They would be simply physically white. They'd still be them, but if anybody looking at them, they're white. And black folks start doing it. And it presents a problem, but mostly for black folks. And they start realizing, this is nuts. I don't want to be white. No, let me get back in my black skin just as soon as I possibly can. It's a very interesting Afrofuturistic book written in 1937 that makes all kinds of sense today.
It's crazy to read it today. I read it recently. It's like he's making points in 1937 that are like about the life that I just experienced in the last like 2
Stuff that
years.
happened to me this
It's
morning.
wild.
I'm like, George was talking about in 37. So that is one. And like I said, there was a short-run musical adaptation, and I know some people are doing other things. So that's one from way back in the day. The Foundation series, which of course is on Apple TV, Isaac Asimov's series. In the way the series is rendered for television, many of the central characters are black women. Women of the diaspora, East Asian, it's just beautiful. They weren't in Asimov's novel, but David Goyer and some of the creators changed them. Took a lot of heat. Took a lot of heat for changing that. But, you know, it's set 4,000 years in the future. Relax. There'll be some black people there. So that's a very strong series, these very powerful women in that series. And I'm going to go just old school for myself here for a second here. I'm a big fan of Deep Space Nine. I'm a Trekkie anyway. But Deep Space Nine is my Star Trek. There you go. Deep Space Nine is the blackest Star Trek in the universe. The captain, the commander of Deep Space Nine, is brother, Benjamin Sisko, played by the wonderful Avery Brooks, who also played Hawk in the excellent television series Spencer for Hire, but I'm going too deep. He's a captain of the space station and the Defiant. Now think about this for 1 second. Because the central character in Deep Space Nine is a black man, you're gonna have a whole bunch of other folks who are gonna be black. His daddy, played by Brock Peters, black. His son, Jake, black. His wife, who in the show is dead, but because it's Star Trek, we see her all the time anyway, black. His girlfriend, he can have a girlfriend because his wife is dead, black. Technically, if you count Worf, another brother. He's a Klingon, but you know,
Worf. Yeah.
Michael Dorn is under there, bruh. This show, just because of the nature of it, starting with anchoring it with that lead, it blossomed out, bloomed out into this show that put black folks all over the Star Trek universe, henceforth and forever. And of course, we have Geordie LaForge over on Next Gen and all this kind of stuff. But that show, I think, is really, really pivotal. Yes, there's all kinds of Star Trek stuff going on in that show, but if you watch that show, what you're going to see are 3 generations of fathers and sons who adore each other. Brock Peters loves his son, Avery Johnson, Ben Sisko. Ben Sisko loves nothing more than his son, Jake. And they live to take care of each other and the family around them that extends into it. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful show. So, you know, Deep Space Nine, pop culture, but good pop culture, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you so much. We could go on forever with this, and I want to keep in contact with both of you because this was just amazing, and I want to talk with you more. But we are getting close to the end, and so we want to leave some time for you all. I think we have time for at least 2 questions. And so Tony, thank you, and I put the mic right up there, is going to go around, so please raise your hand. There's someone right here with their hand raised. Oh, yeah, turn it on. Did you flip it up? Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, there it goes. It's
Okay. Thank you so much for this. It's been wonderful and really interesting. Before we leave the topic, I guess we won't because it's the end, but of the arts, I want to recommend to everyone this wonderful biography of Zora Neale Hurston. It's called Wrapped in Rainbows. So if you're interested in more Hurston, that's a good thing. And then the photography of Ken Gonzalez Day, who works on whiteness, and blackness, and he is like a friend of mine, and he's known throughout the world now as someone who does gender and race.
Thank you.
Crystal, she had her hand up first. Back there, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll produce it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only question that needed to be asked. So, Monique, thank you for bringing this here, and thank you all for coming. Tim, I listened to you on the radio, so it's nice to see you in person. I was like, I know that voice. So, as a lay consumer of pop culture, the folks that have brought Afrofuturism to me is Janelle Monáe and Nicki Minaj, and of course Octavia Butler, who I think of. So could you guys speak to those three women a little bit?
I mean, Octavia Butler, what can be said? I would love to hear Tim's. I'm really excited about Octavia's bookshelf that's opening up.
Yeah.
So I'm planning on living there. But she's the queen. She is doing things that I think are really interesting because I think that traditional definition of Afrofuturism, she stretches it, right? And I love the stretching that she does with it. I think I read, oh no, I'm blanking because I'm in front of people. But so yeah, the seed series, sower, yeah, so yeah, Parable of the Sower. Thank you. That was it's an incredible novel, devastating read. I mean, it's about a world that is really, really possible if we keep playing around. And for me, that's, I think, essential to the Afrofuturist perspective. The idea of envisioning a black future, whether that future is utopian or dystopian, black people are going to be in it. And I think that we have a responsibility right now to really try to imagine and use our imaginations to imagine something better than what we have. There was a time when slavery was a thing that was not to be upended. And people dared to imagine a world where the institution of slavery didn't exist in the way it did. They were mostly successful. It transformed. We still have semblances of it. And our job now is to try to figure out how to actually abolish that system. And I think if you're watching the news and you're experiencing your own lives and you're in proximity to people who are marginalized and victimized in the society, then you have a responsibility to really try to use that imagination and be brave and partner with people who are willing to imagine futures that are different than the one we have now. That's what I say about Octavia Butler. That's it.
Really quickly, I'm so sorry to do this. We are at time. I see that Keith has gone. So we have to say goodbye to everyone watching online. Goodbye, everyone. Go back and wave. We can stay here. We just have to stop broadcasting, so bye, everyone at home. But we can stay here for a while, if you all are, for a couple more minutes. But thank you so much. Before we sign off, let's clap it up for our... And we're still here if people have questions or anything.